Hey everybody, my name is Drew, and I wanted to make this video for a while now, basically just to get thoughts out of my brain and heart and discuss all the different JRPGs I've played in the last 3 or so years and compare them, just to figure out what I like, what is good, what is bad, all totally subjective, obviously. I have a really long history with JRPGs that I'll detail fairly quickly. I always kind of thought of them more recently as like a Dungeons and Dragons inspired video game. And I'm not totally sure on the history of that and the terminology of role-playing game, because basically every game you're playing a role, and there's plenty of amazing videos that kind of discuss this whole naming, epidemic we're in with genres and games, and other media too. But I remember one time I was playing Dungeons and Dragons, the only time I've played it, with a group I didn't know. And once I got my bearings and figured out how the game worked and saw the pattern and cycle emerge, I was kind of like, oh man, I kind of want to go back and play Xenoblade, which is the game I was playing at the time. Just because I saw the numbers and the rolling and kind of the algorithms that are happening in the background of a game happening more in the forefront. And obviously the creativity and the storytelling is really the whole crux of D&D and RPGs and why so many people gravitate towards them. Especially when you're going through a lonelier part of your life, or a pandemic, for example. It can really feel like you're having friends and having story and growth and progression and getting somewhere and able to conquer and have a semblance of normalcy and control. And for me, basically since graduating college, I've really leaned into JRPGs. I've still had a healthy balance with it, but it's been a really great escape, fantasy, and kind of story and dynamic for me. So that's why it really means a lot to me, and I really wanted to kind of just chronicle my experience with them and kind of compare and contrast all the ones I've played, since I've kind of dived into almost all the big series that I've heard about forever but just have never tried. So I guess first I'll go through my gaming adolescence, as it were. I really didn't play many RPGs growing up. My first were definitely Pokemon, like probably most people. I played Fire Red and Emerald and went back and played Yellow and Gold and Silver and Crystal, and I've pretty much played every generation since, and that's kind of been one of my favorite series. But then whenever I tried to springboard from there to a more turn-based RPG, for example, I got Dragon Quest on the DS, forget which one, probably like 7 or 8 or 9. I think I got 2 different ones. I remember one was just like a gift, and I was not very excited for it because I was following Nintendo at this time, and I saw that it was a big deal that it was coming out on the DS, but it was more popular in Japan. And I really, nothing stuck with me. I got a few hours in, I had my party, and I remember I hated that you had to name your party members, and you could customize them, and they weren't unique monsters like in Pokemon. And that, to me, was enough to make the gameplay feel so pointless and repetitive and, just totally boring, even if the story was good. I remember once I think I borrowed Dragon Quest Jokers, which was kind of like a Pokemon clone, and I absolutely loved that, had to catch them all. Same thing as Pokemon. I remember also early on playing this Digimon game on the DS. I think it was Digimon Dawn or Dusk, and I beat that entirely. I remember thinking it was weird that there were 4v4 or multiple monsters at once. But once I got used to that, I was just totally in love. And then, I know this is kind of separate because it's kind of a roguelike, but one game that really, really impacted me early on was Pokemon Mystery Dungeon. I guess it was Blue and Red Rescue Team, the first one. And that was the first game I played that had a story that was kind of the same effect a movie or a book would have on me around that same time. I was reading Percy Jackson, Harry Potter, watching Marvel and fantasy movies and books, so it kind of had that same feeling. I remember when the protagonist gets has to run away from town and is on the run, and just that feeling was absolutely unmatched to any game I'd played before, even if it's kind of a small scale, not like a big Hollywood budget game. And I remember also around that time getting into Spectrobes, all sorts of other games, more Nintendo platformers, got into shooters later on into high school. But the games I always liked were more of the action or strategy persuasion, if there were RPGs. Although one fairly early into high school was Paper Mario, and I played the N64 game and then Thousand Year Door. And I remember absolutely falling in love with those for kind of the gameplay and the story marriage was just perfect with those. And then I also played the Mario and Luigi games, which were kind of also kind of a, baby's first RPG, kind of in there with Pokemon. But they were a little bit more traditional in their kind of, I guess, gameplay, being turn-based. But there's being some action elements and input selection. And I remember once, well, I guess not once, but playing Xenoblade Chronicles X, when that came out on the Wii U, that was like later high school. And I remember the numbers were the first thing that were like extremely intimidating to me coming from, the more casual Mario RPGs and Pokemon, where you were level like 12 and you did 30 damage and you had 60 HP. But then in Xenoblade X, it was just like right away doing 100 damage and having like 2000 HP and huge health pools. And the scale and everything to manage was just so much different. And I was following Nintendo pretty intensely around this time, late high school. So I remember getting Xenoblade 1 on the 3DS, which was just amazing. And I would say that was the thing that impacted me the most, that brought me to where I am today in terms of just shaping my preferences for RPGs, or I guess JRPGs, since most of them I've played are more Japanese since then. Obviously I played Skyrim and Fallout and a lot of Western RPGs growing up. But since playing Xenoblade, I don't think I've played many Western RPGs. They've mostly been Japanese. And then I'll be remiss if I don't mention some of my other favorite action RPGs around this time. Monster Hunter, late middle school, all the way to current, has been like my second favorite series. Fire Emblem has been pretty big for me. And Diablo 3 was good. I also really, really liked the Hyrule Warriors games. Almost 100% of those. I say almost because there's so many adventure maps, and the grind got really real with those games. But I don't even really consider those JRPGs since, Fire Emblem's more strategy, and, Monster Hunter is really, really action-focused, and there's barely a story. And then the Dynasty Warrior games are kind of combo-centric, even though there is leveling up. But I kind of point those out to say that that's my diet, and I prefer either a really, really good story or really, really good gameplay that has this nice, relaxing, escapist hook that really can take me somewhere else and give me a nice checklist. So, kind of the two conflicting parts of my personality there with those. So anyway, that's kind of the end of my prelude of my adolescence and diet growing up that shaped my preferences now. During college, I was pretty much extremely busy, all sorts of social clubs and friends and new experiences. So really it was just Smash Brothers, Mario Kart, nothing super RPG-centric until senior year when Xenoblade 2, I guess I got a little bit late, but I played through that and almost gave up. I did probably 15 hours or so, and I was just not feeling it. I put it down. I picked it back up, I guess later when I was just bored, and I got to this part that was just this part of no return in terms of story hooking me. And that became pretty much my favorite game. Not of all time, but just of recent memory. And that kind of found my love for JRPGs, and it kind of made me curious about what else was out there. I remember hearing about Persona 5 all the time around this year because that had come out, and it topped so many YouTubers I followed in people's Game of the Year. It kind of was one of those breakthrough RPGs. But I didn't have a PlayStation 4, so I really didn't give it any credence. And then I heard all this talk about Final Fantasy VII Remake, and I've always kind of heard about Final Fantasy, but just never ever even tried it. And then, I heard rumbles of Dragon Quest XI coming to Switch, which was kind of a big deal, and I've always kind of wanted to try that again since I'd played a few on the DS. And that reminds me, I also played Bravely Default on the 3DS and totally dropped it after 5 or 10 hours. For some reason, I could never get into turn-based combat that's not Pokemon. And obviously, I was still really, really into. I remember Let's Go Pikachu was just so great, just kind of a comfort food. So anyway, Xenoblade 2, probably my best example of my preference, minus some of the aesthetic kind of choices of that game and some of the more anime storytelling tropes. Overall, though, the character development, the grand story of it, was definitely, to me, like the characters weren't as strong as Xenoblade 1, but the story itself and the environment and the twists and turns and the world and environments to me were more, and the gameplay loop and the side quests to me were a lot better than Xenoblade 1. And they're hard to compare because they are like quite different, surprisingly. But that in terms of story was so impactful to me that year. I think that was 2018, most of when I played it. And that to me just really changed my worldview. It was a very like kind of philosophical game, as most RPGs are. And then looking into history is interesting too, because the company that made those split off from Square Enix, and then same thing with Square and Enix combining, Squaresoft and Square Enix combining. So a lot of these have similar roots in terms of inspiration, whether it's books or to me like D&D, and there's all sorts of other things. But shortly after that, Fire Emblem Three Houses was a huge game for me. Again, I won't really get into that since to me it's not quite a JRPG, even though it has a lot of similarities. But let's just say that was probably one of my favorite games. Shortly after that, it was my favorite game after graduating college. I played it around that time. Played all 4 campaigns. Absolutely just love the amount of character customization, because to me that is where the role-playing shines, is when characters can befriend other characters in whatever way you want. They can die, they can live, they can have kids. It affects the gameplay, the strategy of it all, different routes and story branches. So, always very excited for that franchise. Shortly after that, though, I guess next was Dragon Quest XI, and so I'd kind of been interested in Dragon Quest since I knew it was a big series. I knew, Mario had a lot of crossovers, whether it was Fortune Street or some of the sports titles. So I was kind of curious on the world of it, and this was kind of a test to me of like, can I get into traditional JRPGs, because I've always been opposed to it, but maybe now, after playing other ones, I would be into it. But there was no tricking my brain. This game to me is just so average, and I don't want to be too down on it because it is objectively a good game. And I did beat it, which is kind of crazy looking back on it, since pretty much most of the game I was just feeling like fine, like it was good. Some of the story was interesting. It was beautiful graphics. Some of the characters had interesting moments. But at the same time, it just felt to me algorithmic, and like I was just walking to a new location, getting to a new town, talking to all the people, fixing their problems, discovering a mystery, fighting a boss, getting a new character, repeat. And it really just felt like I was on rails, and there was no inspiration or motivation for me to explore, do side quests, go off the beaten path, level up, learn unique moves, get this character this new aesthetic or armor. And those things are all in the game, but to me it was just, whether it was the story or the gameplay, probably the latter, really didn't give me any kind of motivation to go further with it than I should have, and a lot of people did, even with the amazing post-game. And then shortly after that, I guess Pokemon Sword and Shield came out that year, and that was just one of the most addicted I've been to a game. And I remember being excited to come home from work and just like sink into it. And even though I had a lot of issues with it and all the drama, as any Pokemon fan of my age and experience with the series can tell you, I still had just a huge amount of fun with it. And I remember wanting to push myself with difficulty, and I would just constantly rotate out team members to keep everybody leveled pretty low. And then the DLC for that was pretty fun too, with all the open world. And the most fun thing around that time for me was completing the National Dex, which I almost did, bar like 6 Pokemon that were the mystical Pokemon from the Sun and Moon era, and the X and Y era that I just missed out on without following those as intensely and going to GameStop or whatever you have to do to get all those mystical codes, which is always really frustrating and annoying that I was that close to completing the decks. But yeah, I was full steam ahead. Dragon Quest didn't really impact my drive to try more franchises. Or fairly shortly after that, I got a PlayStation 5, which was huge since I'd kind of wanted to play all these PS4 games, but just never was able to. So first on my list was Persona 5, and this was actually a 2021 title for me, probably my game of the year, even though it's an older game. But, I mean, it was 100 hours, like the longest story game I've played, and it absolutely ticked every box and just absolutely made me fall head over heels for this franchise. And it was a true novel into a video game, or even manga. The storytelling was just beautiful and interwoven in so many different ways. Wasn't perfect. I do think it was a little bit too wordy and had a lot of extra repeated dialogue and text and character interaction. But the weirdest thing to me is that I loved it so much, like it's in my top 5 games of all time for sure. And I've never played a Persona game. I did, now that I think of it, this is something I forgot to mention, I did play Tokyo Mirage Sessions on the Wii U, which was kind of Shin Megami crossed with Fire Emblem. And I got about halfway through that game and dropped it and just kind of lost momentum. And how could I forget this? Shoot. I also, around late high school, played Tales of the Abyss on 3DS, and that game was just absolutely an S tier for me as well. But at the same time, I got to like Act 3, like very late in the game, and just totally dropped it and just lost all motivation. And it's funny, I remember watching a YouTube video recently, and he had the same exact experience with Tales of the Abyss, and a lot of RPGs, where he just loses steam at the last chapter. And something else that I had started doing in late high school, I remember playing Mario & Luigi, Bowser's Inside Story. I guess that was like one of the newest ones. And I remember at the last boss, I just like stopped caring and lost to it and didn't want to grind and think. So I remember just looking up the final boss and the ending and feeling very complete. And since then, I've kind of, every once in a while, gone down that route, sometimes even stronger, which isn't the best, but to me, I play games more now for the escapism, the distraction, the comfort, or the storytelling, and kind of like a book or a movie or a hobby like some people would have. And so if, you know, with being an adult and having more finite time and holding time more important than when I was a kid, I really do, you know, try to maximize my fun and efficiency sometimes in taking out and getting through the end. And with all that being said, PS5, dived into Persona 5. The weirdest thing to that, and that was one game I actually didn't skimp on the difficulty, so I did beat it all the way through on normal. I think except for maybe, actually I might be lying, I think for the final boss, I remember it taking me like 40 minutes and just losing, and I was like, how can a boss A be that long on a turn-based game? And B, why would I want to just possibly do that 5 times or more or less? Or like, that's so much wasted time when I can just beat it once and get to the story. So I do remember dropping it to easy and just to see it through. But I didn't do anything like look it up on YouTube. I did finish it and see the credits roll on my own TV and system, and absolutely shedding a nice, beautiful tear of just feeling connection to the characters, and the song got me. It was just such a beautiful end. And the weirdest thing with that game was that it's a turn-based game, and it's closer to Pokemon in that the main character can switch personas and have different kind of demons to fight. So that part was addictive, just like Pokemon. A lot more complex. Kind of like, I think of it like an adult version of Pokemon with a good story. But then the other side characters are more like the traditional Dragon Quest or Final Fantasy, where they just have kind of a stagnant type, and they learn moves, and they don't change. And to me, that's even one part that I didn't love, but I still liked the characters a lot, and you could switch them in and out enough that it was still really fun for me. So, Xenoblade 1 and Persona 5 now being kind of my tentpole games of all time, especially in terms of JRPGs, and Xenoblade 2. So, shortly after that, Final Fantasy VII Remake was a thing that I've been looking forward to playing, and I played through that as well this past year, and even the DLC, which was really cool. And this game was especially frustrating as kind of a newcomer to Final Fantasy. The difficulty was not quite it for me, and I ended up switching basically to easy for all the bosses, since, again, the bosses took me like 30 minutes. And there were quite a few that I actually stayed on normal for the bosses, I remember the Hell House specifically was kind of a painful bout, but I did stick to normal and I was able to beat it. But it just felt like I was just doing no damage, and I feel like my skill level and comfortability with the series prevented me from really feeling confident in the battles. And I remember it was annoying because the normal battles were just so much fun and so well paced, but then the bosses were just this crazy strategy mess. But yeah, this game, to me, the kind of the acting and the script was very, very lacking, and I know so many people disagree that grew up with this game, but for me, as it being, I guess, my second Final Fantasy game ever, which I'll explain in a second, just mention this one first accidentally, it just didn't quite hit where it should hit in every way. I did like the story, but I think the characters were lacking a lot, and some of the world just being very bleak, and I know that's kind of the point of the game, and I did appreciate it being different than other kind of luscious fantasy games like Dragon Quest and Xenoblade, so it was really cool. And the combat to me was really cool since it was kind of a blend of turn-based and blend of strategy and blend of action, so to me that's almost I'd say my favorite gameplay kind of action system, close to Xenoblade, but I probably prefer it to those, both 1 and 2, slightly. So I forgot one thing was, before 7, I actually played 15, which was free on PlayStation Plus, and Final Fantasy 15 is very controversial to fans. It's just kind of hot or cold. It was a little more open world. I remember watching the movie and watching the anime that's on YouTube for each character, and just surprisingly falling in love with this game, and to be honest, I prefer it to 7 Remake. I just had a lot more fun with the combat. It felt a lot more open. I didn't really experience the open world or do many side quests, but it was very, very fun and relaxing, and I especially liked the main characters. They really grew on me over time, and playing some of the DLC was fun too. But they really did a good job of fleshing out each character, and I cried quite a few times near the end of this game. It's just so heartfelt, and it's basically 4 brother, kind of best friend characters. And during a hard time of loneliness and isolation and living alone during the pandemic, this game was exactly what I needed. It really felt like I had true connection and true kind of camaraderie, even if it was just pixels, which is kind of sad, but really powerful too. Also, a little bit before this time, I replayed Xenoblade 1, the remake on Switch, and it kind of cemented itself as my favorite game of all time. This time I was able to see it through. On the 3DS, I didn't quite finish it. I kind of did that thing where I dropped it in the 3rd act again. And I'd watched it on YouTube, so I knew enough to play Xenoblade 2. But it was so cool to see all the plot twists that I'd missed and all the deep story cutscenes. And this, to me, again, is definitely my favorite in terms of overall. But there are certain other games that definitely do certain things better. Later on this year, another big JRPG I played was Tales of Arise, which I remember getting the demo and just not playing it or really giving it a chance, but really just not liking it. The combat just felt really weird. And, it had been since 2013, 14 that I had played Tales of Abyss, and really loving that game. But to me, this combat system didn't remind me of that at all. But I heard a really good review of it, and I was like, you know what, I'm having a hard time. I need something new, and I just bought it on a whim, and really, really got hooked into this. Loved the story, loved the voice acting, the writing. The combat especially was really, really awesome. Maybe by the very end of the game, the combat got a little bit repetitive, but for all the different kind of action-y systems it has with combos and using different characters and comboing them and the chemistry with all the characters, it just became a really, really comforting and exciting game. Although, this was probably the worst case of me lowering the difficulty at the last act of the game. And I think the story is amazing up until the last act, and it gets just so messy, and it gets cool and philosophical, and it kind of turns from fantasy to sci-fi. And there's almost like a second half of the game, which is really cool. Music is all really good too. But yeah, I just basically dropped it to easy for the last act of the game and just wanted to see it through just because it just felt so painful in that way. But yeah, I really loved seeing it through and discussing and just looking into things on the subreddit. So I'll be excited for more series of that going forward. And then the last game I most recently finished was Shin Megami Tensei 5, which is quite a mouthful, and I just love saying that. But I'd always been interested in this franchise since I had first been introduced on Tokyo Mirage sessions, and then, you know, playing Persona 5 and knowing the demons, and seeing this as a big Switch game and big game in the series. And man, I really, really loved this game. I loved trying to get every single demon. It really did feel like adult Pokemon. M-rated Pokemon. Just really, really dark, apocalyptic game. The story wasn't quite there for me, but it really scratched that itch. Even for being a turn-based game, which is just crazy to imagine that I liked it. But it had enough similarities to Pokemon in that you're always getting new demons and fusing them, capturing them. The difficulty was weird, and I did end up dropping it to easy quite a few times, especially near the end of the game, which got so wild, and again, I got a little bit tired of grinding. But to me, this game reminded me of almost like Breath of the Wild and Pokemon Sword, like finding the Diglets. Just the exploration and going around and getting items, learning the maps, trying to find all the demons and explore, and the different systems and the warping and the healing. Everything felt very close to D&D and the things I like about that, and closer to the more action RPGs, what they could evoke. Maybe not because it's an action, but this one evoked a lot of the gameplay that I liked in those games, but in a turn-based system, for what it's worth. And then something else I missed that I played last year was Monster Hunter Stories 2, which is almost like a midpoint of Pokemon in Shin Megami Tensei, and that it's similar to Pokemon to me. You're collecting monsters, monsties, leveling them up, but it's a little more childlike in its storytelling, and had kind of a different gameplay system. Even though it's a little bit turn-based, it had enough hooks there that kept it really fun for me until dropping it after beating it, just because the post-game was quite boring. So I think that's pretty much it. I do want to reiterate that difficulty is huge to me. It's so interesting because Pokemon to me, it's frustrating how easy it's gotten, and I remember Pokemon Black being my favorite. I mean, I literally played that, just the story, of the game, literally like 5 times through, over and over, and then I had White as well, and I would just transform my Pokemon to White, restart Black, play it again, use a totally different team. But like, team building to me is my favorite part of Pokemon, and I think when I can translate that into an RPG, like, to me, Xenoblade X I liked a lot because it had a lot of character building, being more open world. Xenoblade 2 I liked a lot since there were so many blades, and so it really felt like there were like 20 characters, and almost like Pokemon, you could collect them and use different team combinations. So I definitely prefer those gameplay systems to a game like Xenoblade 1, where I'm going to play Shulk a lot of the time. There are other characters, but it's a little more static and set how characters are going to work. But to me, the action elements of games like that in Final Fantasy VII, like playing with different characters in 7, especially like Yuffie in the DLC, can be so fun. And same with Tales of Arise. Like, there's so few characters compared to others. Like, Tales of Arise has probably 6 or 7, and you can only have 4 in your party at once. But playing as each one was so different and fun. And they do unlock new moves and stuff, and there are ways to customize them. Same with actually, well, not Final Fantasy 15, but there's games with customization that can make it so fun to just build your party out, and can make it feel so good when you can switch out and work and then be able to beat a boss that stumped you up. So yeah, I really love, good difficulty. But on the other side of things, when it's something like Persona or, like a turn-based game and the difficulty is just so out of whack, it just really turns me off and makes me not really want to waste so much time. So it's funny that there's that golden balance where with Pokemon I love doing Nuzlocke and making it hard and limiting items and battle rotation and all the things you do to make vanilla Pokemon easy. But with other games I'll get to the end of the game and set it to easy or story mode just so I can see it through. And then the other conflicting part of my personality is that I love games like roguelikes. I really got into Binding of Isaac and not Hades as much, but and Pokemon Mystery, like the new remake of Mystery Dungeon was so huge for me. I actually 100% of that game, at least in terms of getting all the legendaries and beating every dungeon, doing everything feasibly, getting all the badges. Like, that game was so amazing for me to revisit. And then I went back and played Pokemon Sky, which was the second Mystery Dungeon Pokemon game. absolutely loved that. And I mean, those do have good stories, but they are more roguelike and simple. Same thing with the Dynasty Warrior games. Those games I just absolutely could play forever. But really, like, besides the shorter story, it's mostly about the gameplay. And, you know, the newer Hyrule Warriors, Calamity Ganon was so great, 100% of that. So I have this conflicting thing where it's like, I really need a really good story. You know, in terms of like Persona and Final Fantasy, Xenoblade. But then the other part of my personality loves the really, not mindless, but kind of repetitive and feel-good action. Same thing with Fire Emblem. I just love a good challenge. Same thing with Fire Emblem, actually. Like, I literally almost beat one of the campaigns on the Hellish, or whatever the highest difficulty is for Three Houses. And I always play on, like, classic with the permadeaths. So it's really interesting how the difficulty to me is very polarizing based on the game, and then the story. If you know, needing a really amazing story or not caring that there's not a story is also very polarizing for me based on the game. And I wasn't planning on those being the biggest takeaways for this video, but interestingly, I think that's kind of where I've landed. And yeah, if anybody can relate, definitely let me know. I'd love to discuss further with anybody that wants to chat. JRPGs and games in general have been a huge thing for me in the last couple of years. Whether it's in college to connect me to all of the friends around me and to play couch co-op Yoshi and Donkey Kong and Smash and Mario Kart, like those were some great times in college. Or even during the pandemic, you know, playing Among Us, playing Minecraft, playing Monster Hunter, games that can connect me to my family and friends that aren't safe to gather around and are states away that I miss. Games like Animal Crossing to connect me to family members and loved ones that have never really played games before. And then also, obviously, what the point of this video is, like, JRPGs and games that can take you to another place, a lot of the time are more fantasy-focused. If you're having a sucky life, I was going through an injury in 2020, 2019, a lot of loneliness, living alone, pandemic, making friends and then not being able to see them because of the pandemic, and just some rough stuff. So being able to lean on some of those amazing experiences, characters, stories, friends, and worlds was everything to me, and it's something going forward that's going to be a great memory. Hopefully I'll be busier soon with the world opening up and getting back to normal and trying to progress in my work and personal life, so I hope to not have to lean on JRPGs as much going forward, but I'm really thankful for what they have been able to do for me and help me to even grow as a person, and from these stories and from walking in another person's shoes, mostly a spiky-haired 18 young adult with a crazy sword, but still being able to empathize and hear stories and really grow compassion for people that are different than me, and help me develop my worldview and all sorts of weird Japanese philosophy. Yeah, I have a lot to thank for JRPGs, and excited to try more franchises going forward. And I'd love to hear any recommendations too for any other series I might have missed or amazing games. Yeah, going forward, I'm really excited for obviously all the sequels to series that I've gotten into recently. And I'm considering going back and playing Persona 4 and 3 next to dive into those older games. But yeah, thanks for anybody that listened, and again, would love to chat about any of this. Yeah, I've been Drew, and thank you so much, and have a great one.